For centuries, an undeniable power has been hidden, suppressed, buried beneath layers of deception, rewritten history and carefully designed systems meant to keep it from ever rising again. It was no accident. Those who sought control knew that if this power were ever rediscovered, if these people ever remembered who they truly were, no force on earth could contain them. They crafted distractions, designed struggles, and wove illusions to keep them locked in survival mode, disconnected from their true identity. But time is a force no man can stop, and destiny cannot be denied. The awakening has begun. Noah felt it before he understood it, a deep stirring in his spirit, a shift in the very fabric of his being. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a dream. It was revelation, an undeniable presence that demanded his attention. It did not speak in words, but in truth, in visions that unfolded before him with such clarity that he could no longer ignore them. And then, in an instant, everything changed. A blinding light engulfed him, not the kind that burned, but the kind that revealed. Before his eyes, he saw a history that had been stolen and a future waiting to be reclaimed. He saw chains breaking, not just physical chains, but spiritual ones. He saw men and women rising, not just standing, but standing in power. A young woman stood in prayer, her voice carrying an authority that made the very air tremble. A man spoke in the streets, and though he did not shout, his words shattered strongholds. Communities once divided by pain and history were coming together, united not by struggle, but by purpose. This is not fantasy, this is not myth, this is real, and it is happening now. Noah's eyes were opened, and in that moment he understood. This power had never been lost, it had never been destroyed, it had only been waiting for the right time, for the right people, for those bold enough to reclaim what was always theirs. But with revelation comes responsibility, with power comes opposition, and as the light rises, so too does the resistance. The enemy will not surrender easily. This is not just a story, this is a call to those who feel it, to those who know deep down that they were meant for something greater. It is a call to rise, to stand, to awaken. The choice is before us. Division leads to destruction. Unity leads to victory. The awakening is not coming, the awakening is here. Will you answer the call? Noah's breath caught in his chest as the visions unfolded before him, cascading like a waterfall of truth, unstoppable and undeniable. He was no longer standing in the place he once knew. Instead, he was surrounded by a radiant glow, as if the very fabric of existence had been peeled back to reveal something deeper, something ancient yet new. A voice, powerful yet gentle, resonated through his soul, not with sound, but with knowing. "Look and see," it commanded. Before him, a young woman stood alone in a dimly lit room. She was not famous, not wealthy, not someone the world would recognize, and yet, as she lifted her hands in prayer, the atmosphere around her shifted. The walls seemed to hum, the air itself grew charged, and a presence filled the space, undeniable and holy. The words she spoke were not mere sounds, they carried weight, authority. People entered that room weary, broken, sick, and they left transformed. Some were healed in their bodies, others in their minds, but all were touched by something far beyond human understanding. Then the vision shifted. Noah found himself in the midst of a crowded city street. Cars rushed by, horns blared, and the world moved as it always had, chaotic, hurried, distracted. But among the rushing bodies, one man stood still. He was young, yet his presence commanded attention. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not demand that people listen, and yet they stopped. His words cut through the noise, not because of charisma or persuasion, but because they carried an authority that could not be ignored. It was not human. It was something deeper, something spiritual. As he spoke, people felt their hearts unlock, their burdens lift, their eyes open. Truth had found them, and there was no turning back. "Do you see?" the voice whispered again. The visions came faster now, flashing like lightning across the sky. Noah saw churches overflowing, not just with people, but with power. These were not just gatherings, they were battlegrounds where chains were being shattered, where generations of oppression and deception were crumbling beneath the weight of truth. He saw men and women worshiping with a fire that could not be extinguished, their voices rising in unison, shaking the very foundations of the spiritual realm. Every song was warfare, every prayer was a weapon. Then he saw the artists, the musicians, the writers, the painters. But they were not just creating, they were prophesying. Their art was more than beauty, it was revelation. Each stroke of paint, each lyric, each melody carried a power that stirred the souls of those who experienced it. Hearts that had been hardened by years of pain began to soften. Eyes that had been closed to truth were being forced open. The world had taught them to see their creativity as entertainment, but now it was being restored to its true purpose, a conduit of divine power. And there was more. Communities once impoverished, once dependent on broken systems, were rising. Black-owned businesses flourished, not just surviving but thriving. Schools were no longer places of limitation but centers of empowerment. Knowledge that had been hidden, buried for centuries, was returning. Wisdom of the ancestors, understanding of healing, of wealth, of leadership. They were no longer waiting for a system to provide. They were building their own. Noah's heart pounded. He saw it all: the rise, the power, the restoration. But then the voice spoke again, this time with an urgency that sent chills through his very soul. This will not come without resistance. And suddenly the light dimmed. The warmth faded, shadows crept in at the edges of the vision, and Noah saw something that made his stomach tighten with dread. There were forces moving against this awakening, forces that had worked for centuries to keep it from happening. They were not finished. The enemy had another plan. He saw division, brothers turning against brothers, sisters against sisters. He saw debates that turned into battles, differences that became weapons. Political leaders whispered lies, stirring conflict. Media narratives twisted reality, feeding fear and resentment. Even within the church, even among the faithful, seeds of doubt were being sown. This is the enemy's greatest weapon, the voice warned. If they remain divided, they will be conquered. Noah's chest ached as he watched. He saw people who had once stood in unity now arguing, accusing, turning their backs on each other. The power they had rediscovered was still there, but it was being misused, distorted, manipulated. But just as despair threatened to overtake him, another vision broke through. A small group of people gathered in quiet rooms, praying together, speaking truth to one another. He saw hearts softening, old wounds healing, hands reaching across divides. He saw forgiveness, true, deep, life-changing forgiveness. And as these small gatherings grew, the light began to push back the darkness. This is the key, the voice said. Unity is the key. Forgiveness is the foundation. If they remember who they are, if they stand together, nothing will be able to stop them. Noah's eyes burned with tears. He understood now. This was not just about reclaiming power, it was about protecting it. It was about guarding their unity, about refusing to let the enemy divide them. It was about rising together, standing together, fighting together. The awakening had begun, but the battle was only just starting. Would they be ready? Noah felt the weight of what he had seen pressing against his chest, but before he could fully grasp the magnitude of it all, the vision shifted once more. The light surrounded him again, pulling him forward into another revelation. He stood in the middle of a vast assembly, thousands, maybe millions of people, their faces lifted with expectation. And at the center of it all were the new leaders, standing with an authority that could not be denied. They were not rulers by force, nor were they chosen by wealth or politics. They were chosen by something higher. A woman stepped forward. She was young, but her presence commanded respect. She was not dressed in expensive garments, nor did she stand on a platform of human-made power. And yet, when she spoke, the crowd grew silent. Her voice was steady, unwavering, filled with something more than mere confidence. It was wisdom, deep, ancestral, divine. She did not speak in the language of division or fear. She spoke in the language of truth. As she spoke, Noah saw people in the crowd begin to tremble, their hearts opening, their burdens lifting. She was not just speaking, she was unlocking something within them. Then, he saw a man standing before a council of world leaders, He was young, but his words carried a weight that could not be ignored. They sought his counsel, not because of his connections, not because of his title, but because of the authority he carried within him. He was not interested in power, he was interested in righteousness, and because of that, the systems of corruption and oppression that had long held sway began to crack under the sheer force of truth. Noah saw them rising in every corner of society, teachers who were not merely educating but awakening minds, business owners who were not just creating wealth but restoring communities, artists whose work was not just admired but transforming hearts. These leaders did not seek attention or recognition. They did not lead for personal gain. They led because they had been called. And then he saw something even greater. Leaders from other nations, drawn to this movement not by political strategy, but by the undeniable presence of something holy. He saw white, Asian, indigenous, and Latino leaders standing alongside their black brothers and sisters, recognizing the spiritual authority that had been restored to them. There was no competition, no hierarchy, only unity. The world was watching, and these new leaders were guiding it into a new era, not through force, but through wisdom, grace, and divine power. "This is why the enemy fought so hard to keep them asleep," the voice whispered, "because once they remember who they are, once they rise, nothing will be able to stop them." But then, Noah saw another vision, one that sent chills down his spine. He saw how the enemy would try to stop them. He saw the media twisting their words, portraying them as threats rather than leaders. He saw governments attempting to silence them, corporations trying to corrupt them, even some religious leaders attempting to discredit them. He saw lies spreading like wildfire, designed to turn people against them, to make them doubt their own calling. And yet, those who stood firm, those who did not waver, became unshakable. Noah saw a young leader standing before a crowd, defamed, attacked, misunderstood. But instead of defending himself, he closed his eyes, lifted his hands, and began to pray. And as he did, something shifted in the atmosphere. The attacks lost their power. The lies fell away. Truth stood unbroken. "Tell them," the voice commanded, "that their leadership will not be easy, that they will be tested, that they will be attacked. But tell them also that if they remain faithful, if they stand in truth, nothing will be able to tear them down." The new leaders were here. They had been called, anointed, prepared. Now they had to decide, would they answer the call? Would they rise? Noah felt his spirit tremble as the vision deepened. This was no ordinary restoration. It was an uprising, a divine movement, a revolution unlike anything the world had ever seen. He saw communities that had long been broken, now rising from the ashes. But this was not just about rebuilding, it was about reimagining. The systems that had been designed to oppress were crumbling under the weight of truth. No longer were Black communities forced to rely on institutions that had failed them time and time again. They were building their own schools that taught not just knowledge, but wisdom. Businesses that did not just create wealth, but empowered generations. Neighborhoods that were no longer at the mercy of outside forces, but thrived through their own strength and unity. This was not just restoration. This was revolution. Noah saw the economy shifting, not in the way the world expected, but in a way that no system could control. Black-owned businesses flourished, but they did not operate by the rules of greed. Instead, they operated by the principles of justice, integrity, and shared prosperity. Wealth was no longer hoarded by the few, but distributed in ways that strengthened entire communities. The old systems, built on exploitation and manipulation, were becoming obsolete. The people no longer needed them. Then he saw something even greater. It was not just the economy that was changing, it was the culture. The arts were no longer just entertainment. Music, literature, and visual expression were now carrying something deeper, something sacred. Artists were no longer just creators, they were messengers. Their songs broke chains, their paintings healed wounds, their words awakened the sleeping. The enemy had long tried to use media and culture to manipulate minds, but now the artists were taking it back. They were reclaiming the narrative, infusing their work with power that could not be ignored. and the world was listening. Noah saw the impact spreading beyond borders. He saw movements rising in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in South America. Wherever the descendants of the oppressed had been scattered, they were now uniting. They were no longer isolated struggles. They were one movement, connected by something greater than politics, greater than economics. It was spiritual. It was unstoppable. This is why the enemy fought so hard to divide them, the voice whispered. Because if they ever came together, if they ever realized their strength, the world would never be the same. And yet, Noah saw the resistance coming. The old powers would not let go easily. He saw them trying to suppress this movement through lies, through fear, through division. He saw media narratives distorting the truth, governments attempting to infiltrate and dismantle what was being built. Even within the movement itself, there were those who would be tempted by greed, by ego, by the need for personal power. Tell them, the voice commanded, that this is not just about fighting oppression. This is about creating something new. The old world is dying, but they must be careful not to build their new world on the same foundations of corruption and control. Noah saw the choice before them. They could choose unity, or they could fall back into division. They could choose wisdom, or they could be lured by false promises. They could choose faith, or they could allow fear to consume them. And then he saw it, the two futures that awaited them. In one, they stood together, unbreakable, leading the world into an era of righteousness and truth. In the other, they allowed division to creep in. They allowed themselves to be distracted by pride, by competition, by selfish ambition. And in that future, the revolution was crushed before it could fully rise. Tell them the truth, the voice urged. Tell them that this is not just restoration, this is revolution, and they must choose whether to fight for it or to let it slip away. Noah stood at the crossroads of the vision, his spirit trembling as he witnessed the final and most crucial revelation. The movement had begun, the people were awakening, the old chains were breaking, but now they faced the greatest test of all, the choice that would determine their destiny. In the vision, he saw two paths stretching before them. One led to unity, power, and divine restoration, the other to division, destruction, and the loss of everything that had been fought for. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment when they would have to decide, would they stand together or would they fall apart? Noah saw the enemy's strategy in full force. He saw deception woven into every corner of society, designed to sow division among them. Political parties turned brothers against each other. Religious differences created unnecessary barriers. Generational gaps led to misunderstanding and resentment. Even among those who wanted the same freedom, pride and personal ambition made them competitors instead of allies. The enemy was no longer using chains and whips. He was using words, ideas, and emotions, manipulating them into tearing each other apart. They must open their eyes, the voice warned. The battle is not just against systems, it is against the spirit of division itself. The greatest weapon the enemy has is making them believe they are each other's enemies. Noah saw communities in conflict, arguing over minor differences while the real enemy laughed in the shadows. He saw leaders rising with influence but falling to corruption. He saw powerful voices being silenced, not by force, but by doubt, by betrayal, by fear. But then he saw another vision, a vision of what could be if they made the right choice. He saw the people laying down their differences and coming together. He saw them choosing love over pride, forgiveness over resentment, wisdom over impulse. He saw them recognizing that their strength was not in their individual success, but in their collective power. In this future, the Black community became a force so strong that no system, no government, no deception could break them. They were no longer fighting just to survive. They were leading, teaching, healing, transforming the world. Other nations followed their example, seeking guidance, seeking wisdom. They were no longer waiting for permission to be great. They were stepping into the greatness that had always been theirs. But it will not come easily, the voice reminded. They must fight for it, not with weapons, not with hatred, but with unity, with truth. with love that cannot be shaken. Noah saw that this battle would not be fought in the streets, but in the hearts of the people. The true enemy was not the government, not other races, not even those who opposed them. It was division itself. The only way to win was to refuse to be divided. And then he saw the final warning. If they did not choose unity, everything would be lost. He saw the darkness closing in. He saw communities turning on each other, their power being stolen not by force but by their own hands. He saw once great leaders falling into selfish ambition. He saw families breaking, movements crumbling, hope being replaced with despair. And in that future, the enemy won, not because he was stronger, but because the people had allowed themselves to be weakened. Tell them, the voice commanded, that they stand at the threshold of history, that the time for waiting is over, that the decision must be made now. Tell them that the choice is simple: unity or destruction, power or defeat, victory or extinction. The time is now, and the world is watching. Noah took a deep breath as the vision faded. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been given a message, and now it was time to deliver it. The awakening had begun, but only they could decide how it would end. Noah stood in silence, the weight of the vision pressing on his soul like the hush before a storm. He had seen it all: the rise, the fall, the battle for unity, and the looming threat of destruction. Now, only one thing remained: the message. The truth that had been revealed to him was not his to keep. It was a call, a declaration, a final warning before the tide turned forever. As he looked ahead, he saw the faces of those who were waiting. Some expectant, some skeptical, some weary from generations of struggle. But all of them were standing at the threshold of something greater than they had ever known. This was not just about reclaiming history, this was about shaping the future. The choice is before you, Noah spoke, his voice steady yet filled with urgency. No one is coming to save us. No government, no politician, no external force will hand us our power. Because the power was never lost. It was hidden, buried beneath centuries of pain, division, and deception. But now it is rising again. And the question remains, what will you do with it? He saw doubt flicker in some eyes, fear, mistrust. The scars of betrayal and oppression ran deep. But he also saw something else: hope, a light that had never been fully extinguished, waiting to be ignited. I have seen the future, he continued. Two paths stretch before us. One leads to victory, to healing, strength, and a restoration beyond what we can imagine. The other leads to chaos, to the slow unraveling of everything our ancestors fought for. And the difference between these two futures is not fate. It is choice, it is action, it is unity. Noah felt his voice grow stronger as he spoke the words he had been given. The enemy has always feared this moment. That is why he fought so hard to keep you distracted, divided, and defeated. But now you must decide if you will continue to play into his hands or if you will rise. If you will stand together, not as individuals seeking personal gain, but as a people reclaiming their rightful place. This is bigger than any one person, bigger than any movement. This is the awakening of a force that cannot be stopped, unless you allow it to be. The wind stirred around him, and for a moment, it felt as if the very air was charged with something divine. Noah knew this was not just a speech, this was a turning point. Do not let fear rule you. Do not let pride divide you. Do not let old wounds keep you from building something new. Because the world is watching, the future is waiting, and history is demanding an answer. He let the silence settle for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Then, with fire in his eyes, he spoke the final truth. Rise or fall, unite or perish. Step into your power or let it slip away forever. The time is now, the choice is yours. And with that, the vision faded. The message had been delivered. Now the world would decide.